Often derided by purists, the Jaguar X-Type actually has a lot to recommend it, with a comfortable ride, luxurious interior, great practicality and a wide range of engine choices, towards the end of its life anyway. What's more, values are slowly but surely starting to creep up on these cars, but that does mean you have to look more carefully than ever. So here's your buying guide to the Jaguar X-Type. Despite being well over 20 years old now, the X-Type's bodywork is actually surprisingly hardy and there aren't too many areas to watch. We'll start at the front though. The bumpers are held into the bodywork, the actual metal, with plastic clips that are very easily dislodged. If these cars have a little bump or a knock, the clips can come dislodged in the bodywork, which means the bumpers start to sag and hang off, and that really doesn't look great. The good news is it's not terminal. You can pull the bumpers off, put the clips back into the body and align them straighter. And if the clips are broken, you can buy them brand new for a few quid. So if the bumpers are hanging off, do still check for accident damage, of course, but to be honest, it's really not a huge issue. Also, the headlights. X-Type use plastic ones, and particularly on earlier cars, they are going to start to go yellow and cloudy over time, but again, that really isn't terminal. You can buy second-hand ones for 40 or 50 quid, and if you do fancy a bit of DIY, you can buy a headlight restoration kit for about 20 quid and polish them up. Really rewarding, and it transforms the front end of the car. Talking of the front end, the grille. It's a plastic item on the X-Type, the facelift and the pre-facelift cars like this one here, and while it does look nice, it's perhaps not the nicest quality in the world. And when you do open the bonnet, the catch is in the middle there, try not to lift it up by the grille, because it is surprisingly easier to break the grille off of the bonnet and then you've got to replace the whole thing. What's more, it's worth checking that it's tight. The bolts that hold it in, it's very easy for these to be wobbly, so when you drop the bonnet back down again, you will get it shimmying back and forth. Unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily mean that yours is damaged or the mounts are ruined. That is just how they are. Consider it a character trait. This is a Jaguar after all. Moving further back, the paintwork on X-Types is actually fantastically high quality. It won awards within Ford when these cars were new for the quality of the fit and finish on the paintwork, and indeed even a slightly careworn example will still polish up really well. This one is a 12,000 mile car, so of course it looks nice. So if the paint doesn't look right, if it's a bit orange peely, if panels don't match, if there's a slight imperfection to it, there's a good chance the car has been resprayed. Now of course, at the value level X-Types are at, that's not surprising, but also it's worth checking if the car's had any accident damage history. Do some checks on the various apps you can get to make sure the car hasn't been written off, because it might not just be mismatched paint that is a potential sign of the car having a crash. Another big issue, aside from crash damage, will be rust. This is a Jaguar after all, it was never going to be immune from it. It's the sills. They are the Achilles heel of X-Types. They're hidden behind these plastic trims here, and unfortunately it's far too easy for them to rot away, and you can't really tell until you get the car up on a ramp. We had a Project X-Type that we bought for a few hundred quid, before my time sadly, and it was rotten, but we couldn't tell when we bought it because you can't see it. So if possible, try and ask the seller to either get underneath it and take some photos for you, or if possible, let them let you jack it up or get it up on a ramp to get a good look at those sills, because under these plastic trims there could be a world of horrors. You can buy whole new sills for these cars, a pair of them for about 150 quid, but of course you're either going to have to be handy with a welder and then get them painted, or you're going to have to pay someone to weld them on for you, and particularly if you're buying an X-Type at the lower end of the market, that could be beyond the point of financial viability, so consider that very carefully. Even if the rest of the car's nice, if it is still a cheap one, rotten sills could be a bad sign. There are other little details to look for. Make sure the mirrors haven't been clipped and things like that. If they're power mirrors, make sure they adjust properly, because if they don't, the car can be hard to drive. And then it's just about little details. Look at the panel gaps, make sure the door handles fit well. But generally, X-Types are really nicely made cars. All those old stereotypes about Jaguars falling to pieces in your hand, by this era, actually wasn't true at all. Although the choice at launch was a little bit limited, which sadly hampered its sales success, by the end of its life the X-Type had a wide range of engines available, and all of them are lovely units in their own way. We'll start with the petrol V6s though. More often than not, if you've got an engine warning light on the dashboard, it's because of a failed oxygen sensor. There's two of them in the exhaust. The primary one, quite easy to change with a standard spanner. The second one is a little bit fiddly to access, might take you a little bit more time and cost more if you're farming it out. It's worth, however, just plugging an OBD2 scanner into the diagnostics port, because that will tell you instantly what is causing that warning light. It's an invaluable investment if you've got a car of this age. Also with the petrol V6s, you might get a misfire, and generally it's probably down to a slightly lazy previous owner. A transverse V6 is a hard engine to access. It's tucked all in here. There's not much room to get down the back of the engine to change the back bank of spark plugs and ignition coils. So it's worth, again, using your OBD scanner. A quick change of plugs and coils on the petrol V6 will likely have it running sweet, because the back ones might have never been done. Also, oil leaks, not particularly uncommon because, again, people are just too lazy to get down the back and access it to change any seals and what have you that might be weeping. If you've got a slightly smelly heater in the car, that's probably because of a failed crank seal. But the good news is you don't have to drop the engine to get to it. You simply pull off the wheel, and in the offside front wheel arch liner, there's a little access flap to get into the engine bay and get access to the crankshaft seal. Change that, have a look at any other weepy oil residue while you're in there, and there's a good chance your X-Type will be oil tight and run a whole lot better. Moving on to the diesel engine cars, the Ford turbo diesel units are actually lovely. They're smooth, torquey, powerful and fantastically economical. Well over 40 mpg on a run is very much achievable. However, as with a lot of common rail diesel engines of this time, they have got coded injectors and fuel pumps, and if they're starting to fail, the car's kind of down on power, it's a bit sluggish, it doesn't idle right, and of course you've got a warning light, that means the injectors are probably to blame. And unfortunately, particularly on a cheaper X-Type, that is bad news because you have to have those coded, and that can easily run into 4 figures. If you have to replace one injector, there's a good chance the other ones are starting to go, and that is bad news. If you're looking to buy a diesel X-Type that isn't running right, feels down on power, generally we'd advise to walk away. These cars aren't nearly rare or valuable enough that you have to put up with that. So if the injectors are failing on a diesel car, just don't even entertain it, frankly. It's quite easy to write the car off with it. If you're buying one of the all-wheel drive X-Types, which we'd highly recommend for their year-round capabilities, it's not uncommon to feel a kind of grinding and rumbling noise from the centre of the car, and that's down to a probably failed prop shaft bearing. Not the end of the world by any means though. It's less than 40 quid for a brand new one, and if you're DIY inclined to get the car up on jacks or on ramps, you can do it at home and it will smooth your X-Type's experience out. The other thing to bear in mind, this is a transverse engined all-wheel drive car, which of course means the transfer box is about this big. It's tiny, which means it's got a very small capacity of oil in it. In other words, if it drops even slightly, it could starve it of oil and cause the transfer box to fail. So it's worth checking that, and for peace of mind, just have it done. However, the official procedure for taking one of these cars to a dealer and having that transfer box oil changed is using a Jaguar pump, which of course you and I don't have access to. So the official workshop advised method for draining all the oil out of it is to jack the car up heavily on one side, get it lifted up at an angle that all the oil drains out of the transfer box. We're not joking. Google the transfer box procedure on these cars and you'll see an image of cars lifted at almost a 45-degree angle to get it all drained out. We wouldn't necessarily advise doing that at home though. Get a specialist to do it, someone who knows these cars, because if you get it wrong and flip your car on its roof, you're going to have a bad day. A lot of people criticise the X-Type for its Mondeo underpinnings, but that does mean that parts are cheap, plentiful and easy to come by. We'll start with the suspension. If you've got a kind of groaning and creaking noise from the front end, particularly on the bigger engine cars, it probably means that you've got either worn top mounts or a broken spring, neither of which is difficult or expensive for you or a mechanic to do. If you've got an ABS warning light on the dash though, it could be a case of a simple ABS sensor, which is 15 or 20 quid and easy to replace, but if that doesn't make it go away, there's a good chance that it's the trigger ring on the hub, which sadly is part of the drive shaft, and that means you're going to be out for a whole new shaft. So try the sensor first, reset the light. If it then comes back on, that means you're in for a whole new drive shaft, and depending on whether you've got a front-wheel drive or an all-wheel drive car, that could be a bit more complex. Finally, talking about the all-wheel drive cars, these are quite powerful cars, and particularly if you're going to be driving them quickly in all conditions, they need to be gripping properly, and you don't want everything to fall out of tolerance. So do just check on the all-wheel drive cars, first of all, the tyres they've got on them. Check that they're a good tyre, not just a cheap no-name brand. Also check the condition of them. Make sure they're the same axle to axle, and preferably on all 4 corners, because if they're in any way different or out of balance, that can really upset most all-wheel drive systems, and the Jaguar one with its tiny transfer box is no exception. With that said though, an X-Type in good health is a lovely thing. It's comfortable, it floats down the road, and actually handles quite well on account of its Mondeo platform. So get it right and it's lovely, but get it wrong and it can be quite compromised. The X-Type's interior is properly Jaguar spec. It's really nice quality, and in all but the most base spec cars where you've got winding rear windows, it's actually nice and luxurious. It's also surprisingly hardy, it wears well, and you don't tend to find X-Types with particularly tatty interiors. You will get a baggy headliner because it's a Jaguar after all, so do check that, but whether that bothers you or not is up to you. And generally, the leather is the only thing you've got to worry about. It can wear, particularly on the driver's seat bolster, but you can buy a feeding and recolouring kit that will nicely bring it up and totally rejuvenate the interior. The other thing to watch, leather gear stick gaiter, obviously on the manual cars, but you can buy the whole new gaiter with the plastic bezel that surrounds it, brand new online for 15 quid. So it really needn't be an issue. If looking at the electric side of things, the fan blower is a little bit weak, and even on full it's making a bit of noise but not really doing anything, that's probably because the cabin filters are clogged. Now to change those, it's actually outside. You've got to pop the bonnet, remove the wipers, remove the plastic scuttle, and then change the cabin filters there. Do that and you'll be surprised how powerful the cooling system, if you're blowing into the cabin, in these cars is. On a higher spec car like this, you've got things like electric seats, you've got heated seats, you might even have sat nav. It's worth taking the time to make sure it all works, because the value on X-Types means that if anything electrical isn't working, replacing it or fixing it probably isn't cost effective. So just take your time, push every button, knob and switch, make sure it all works perfectly. Finally, even on the top spec radio in these cars, you don't get an aux in. These are from an awkward era where you just about got CDs but not much else, and the trouble is, because of the unique shape of the dash, it's not that easy to fit an aftermarket unit in. However, if you're a little bit handy with a soldering iron, you can attach an aux input to where the cassette plugs in on cars with the cassette player so equipped. So it might actually be worth compromising initially, having a slightly more base spec radio on the knowledge it's slightly easier to upgrade it. Finally, if you're buying an estate X-Type, it's worth noting a lot of those were used as family luggers. They might have had dogs and tip runs and all sorts of stuff subjected to the boot. So take your time, look in the boot, make sure that all the trim isn't damaged, and crucially that everything is where it should be and the boot seals up properly. So there's everything you need to know if you want to buy a Jaguar X-Type. But now you know all that, which one should you buy and what should you pay for it? Well, the nicest examples on the market, the lowest mileage facelift cars in the best specs arguably, can be as much as £6,000 or £7,000 these days. But to be honest, we wouldn't necessarily recommend spending that much. You don't need to pay that much money for an X-Type, and what's more, there are far more enticing options at that level. We recommend spending somewhere in the middle. £3,000 to £5,000 gives you your choice of X-Type. You can have a facelift car, whatever engine you want, four-wheel drive if you want it, an estate or a saloon. They will be the nicest ones on the market, and they're the kind of value that if things do need repairing on them, they are financially viable. You can actually get a pre-facelift front-wheel drive, probably a petrol engine car, for as little as 500 quid. And while that is a real bargain at that money, do consider that car at that price is going to have a few issues that may need tending to, probably going to have rusty sills, and if it does fail an MOT, it's probably not going to be financially viable to fix it. So you can buy one at that money, and we wouldn't put you off of it, but just consider the car's long-term future. But whatever you pay for it, whatever spec you get, whatever condition you get, what you get in the Jaguar X-Type is a really, really competent car. It's lovely to drive, comfortable, luxurious inside, practical, usable all year round, and you can safely say that you've got the cheapest Jag that money can buy. Mondeo in a posh frock? I don't think so. Let us know in the comments below what you think to the Jaguar X-Type. Have you owned one? How has it been? Don't forget to like and subscribe for future Classics World videos, and we'll see you again soon.